So for now, I'll introduce our speaker for today, which is Amy Aines. Amy is here to present her third and final workshop for us. And this one is all about interviewing, practices, strategies, and success stories. So I met Amy at the Science Talk conference back in March 2021. The conversation we had about careers in general helped to inspire the idea for PAWS. So Amy is a Amy is a communications strategist who has worked in telecom, wireless tech, and biotech. She is CEO of a consulting firm she founded after a 20-year industry career. Amy is a trainer, speaker, and author of the book Championing Science, who brings the voice of experience and practical how-to advice. After Championing Science was published, Amy changed her career focus. Now her mission is to be a success catalyst for STEM graduates through her lectures and workshops. We are lucky to have her here with us to lead this workshop. And with that, Amy, take it away.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And I echo your appreciation for the opportunity to bring the things that I know to help all of you be more successful in your careers, because that's my passion. I love teaching communication skills, and I love helping young scientists in particular go out into the world and give of your talents. So our focus today is on the competitive situation you find yourself in when you're actually about to interview for a job. And my goal is to help you feel really ready and to be able to interview like a pro, a true professional. And I'm going to share with you a number of communication strategies as I take you through the materials today and get you to engage a little bit around some of these things to begin thinking about how you tell your story, how you show up as the ideal candidate for a job. And as we begin our opportunity together today, I want you to think about what it takes to succeed. And it's a process. So there are two really important ingredients to get you through to the finish line here. And the first is time. You need to give yourself enough time to work through a process. And for those of you who weren't part of the first two workshops, you'll learn more about the graphic that you see here when you watch the video, but I'll just highlight for you that you have to figure out who you are, what your valuable skills are, and then begin to look into companies and company cultures and meet people and network and do informational interviews before you apply for jobs. So it takes time. And I would recommend that you begin at least 6 months, if not a year, before you want to land yourself in a job. The other thing that it takes to interview like a pro is practice. You really need to put yourself through your paces. You need to think about the stories and examples you want to give and how you'll answer questions. Record yourself, watch yourself in the mirror, get some people to interview you. Doing mock interviews is one of the most valuable ways for you to get comfortable having interview conversations. And what you're after when you practice is to internalize your story, because you want to be in conversation. You don't want to feel like you're regurgitating a bunch of answers you wrote down. You want to know how to present yourself. And the best way to do that is to practice. And when it comes to timing, when you get to the point where you're actually applying for jobs and getting interviews, on average, it's going to take you 4 to 6 months to land a job. 4 to 6 months. So that means you need to be prepared for that, emotionally prepared for that, financially prepared for that. And that's the reason that it's important to start early so that you build yourself the runway that you need. And I can tell you stories. I just heard from a student the other day who was lucky enough to land a job at the Broad Institute on her first interview. But I also recently worked with somebody who'd been through 43 interviews. He was incredibly stressed, and he'd gotten to the third round many times, but didn't get selected. And he got in touch with me 2 weeks ago to say he finally got an offer. So it'll happen for you, I can promise. And the things that you're going to learn today, the pro tools and pro tips I'm going to give you, will help you get there. So what are we going to talk about? Well, because I came out of industry, I want to help you have an insider's view of how industry thinks about hiring. and what that means for you when you're in an interview. I also want to talk about a particular type of question, a behavioral interview style question. I want you to know what those are and how to answer them. And then we'll spend some time talking about the things that need to be part of your conversation. You can stand out when you learn how to tell your value story. And that'll help you when it comes to negotiating your compensation too. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the last piece of what I want to cover is about making good first impressions and how you can help interviewers actually see you as the right person for the job. There's some communication strategies that will serve you well, and I look forward to giving you some insight into how to do that. So let's start with how industry people think about hiring, for those of you that are thinking of transitioning out of academia and working in industry. Well, let's start with what they call it when they're hiring people. This is a bit of a clue, the casting director's chair. You might be surprised to hear that they call it talent acquisition. There are people who have that in their job description. They are in charge of talent acquisition. And for them, it's about finding candidates, prospective candidates, cultivating relationships with people who might become candidates. It's about finding people who fit the part. And that's the way interviewers evaluate you. They are looking to see if you fit. They hire for fit. And there's 6 things that they pay attention to. The first 3 won't surprise you because these are the things you convey in your resume and your cover letter. You're letting people know that you have the skills and the knowledge and the experience that fits the job that you're applying for. But what most candidates don't recognize is that interviewers are hiring you not just for your capability, but for who you are as a person. So it's also important to reveal what motivates you, what your values are, and what your mindsets are about the way you approach your work and the way you work with other people. So you can stand out by recognizing that the conversations you have during interviews need to reveal 4, 5, and 6 just as much as you want to be talking about 1, 2, and 3. The other important thing to understand about industry is that it's all about creating value for customers in terms of the products and services a company offers, value for investors, and if they're the kind of company that you want to work for, it's a company that also cares about creating value for their employees. There's an important communication principle that I want you to remember always because it applies anytime you're talking about something important. And that is that you need to tailor what you say to who's listening. You need to think about what it is they care about. So I want to take you through what matters to each of 3 different interviewers who are likely to be part of the committee interviewing you. First, the hiring manager. They want to know that you fit the job, but they also want to know that you'll be a good addition to the team, that you will fit the team. They want to get a sense of your commitment, what your work ethic's like, how far you'll go to get the job done, and whether or not they'll get along with you. They want to have a sense of whether they can build rapport and have a good working relationship with you. The same thing is true for the other team members you'll get a chance to interview with. They're going to want to have a sense of whether you're someone they'd like to work with. And so they're interested in your interpersonal communication skills, how you connect. They're also going to be gauging whether they think you're someone they can trust. Do you have expertise? Are you somebody who shares information openly? Are you someone they would want to work with? And in almost every situation, there'll be somebody from human resources, maybe in the very beginning of the process, but without a doubt, they will have some role in making a decision about whether or not you get hired. And they take a broader view. They're looking at how you fit in the company. They're thinking about your long-term potential. They're thinking about whether you have the right values for the company culture. And they too want to know if you're the kind of person they'd like to work with. So what you see in common here is that every one of these people cares about you as a person, whether you're somebody they'd like to work with. And I want to share a quote from Gwen Carskadden, a woman that I've worked with for many decades now. She has hired her share of people out of school in her roles in biotech as an HR VP. And when we were having a conversation about this, this is what she said. When it comes to hiring decisions, I think rapport is what flips it one way or the other, because a lot of people have the technical skills. It's really about your ability to connect. So think about that. It's important to demonstrate your capabilities, but it's also important to show up as the person that you are. Because when you can be yourself in an interview, it'll help you make sure that you're going to be working with people who want you to be who you are at work. And there's nothing better than being in that kind of a situation. So rapport matters, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on it. Now I want to introduce you to a framework. I think of this as the pro interview formula. This is what you need to be preparing to do when you go into an interview. First and foremost, you want to reinforce your value, the contribution that you are going to be able to make because of the skills you have and who you are as a person. You also want to bring to light what differentiates you, what makes you special, especially as it applies to the job that you're interviewing for. The second thing you want to be able to do is very rooted in communication, and that is engaging the people listening to you. And you do that by figuring out how to talk about who you are in compelling ways, to tell some stories about things you've done. And you do that very specifically by consciously working to connect and build rapport. And a little bit later, we'll talk about how. And the third thing is to show that you fit. You fit the job. You use language that is in the job description when you're during your interviews, and you help them see that you fit because you care about the mission of the company and you fit the culture of the company, and you will be a welcome addition to the team. So this is the framework for you to keep in mind. And I want to say that you will find handouts covering all the material that I share today. And the handouts will actually go even a little bit deeper than I have time to go on some of the topics today. So there'll be a link provided in Jessica's follow-up message to you to get those handouts. One of the first things you have to tell people is one of the toughest questions for interviews, and that is the tell me about yourself question. And oftentimes this gets asked in what's known as a screening interview. That first 30 minutes, more than likely on the phone, oftentimes with somebody from HR, potentially somebody whose job it is to source candidates. And I want to ask you to answer a quick polling question here about what makes this very simple question, tell me about yourself, challenging. What makes it challenging to you?
Amy, I wonder if while we're waiting for the results to come in, you can give me the co-host privileges.
Absolutely, thank you. For the reminder. All right. It looks like 2/3 of you have said that it's all of the above. And this is a tricky question for all of those reasons. The good news is I'm going to help you know how to answer it. If you could close your eyes for a minute, I'm going to answer this question the way Danielle did. She took an approach that was conversational and very focused, and I'd like to relate it to you. So tell me about yourself, Danielle. Well, I'm a statistical modeler and a data scientist who really loves tackling complex projects. And over the years, I've gotten good at commercial trials and assessing the impact of competitors on a business and verifying existing models and business processes. About a year ago, I had a chance to lead a software solution, the development of a software solution used to build analytical reports. And I can tell that the experience I had managing 6 different partners will be really valuable in this role. I've also been volunteering for the past year now for a new nonprofit that's bringing more diversity to STEM, and it's been really fulfilling and helped me build my leadership skills. That's a good long paragraph worth of an answer, very carefully put together for a particular job that she was interviewing for. And by answering this way, she was able to reveal a number of things about herself. So I want to share with you the pro response, how you can stand out when you get asked the "tell me about yourself" question. First, you want to keep it short. You absolutely want to tailor it to the people that are listening to you, the things that they are going to care about. It needs to be professionally focused. You don't want to start by telling me you live in Boston. It's not important. You want to make it interesting. You don't want to tell me things that I can see in your resume. If I'm doing a screening interview, I've just looked at your resume. I know you're living in Boston. I know where you got your PhD. You want to bring me in. You want to engage me with something interesting about yourself. And you also want to find a way to highlight what differentiates you in a way that's relevant to the job. And the fourth part takes some thought. You want to characterize what kind of person you are and how you show up at work. Danielle let me know that she was good at building partnerships because she knew that would be important for the job. She also demonstrated that she cares about other people and she takes time to volunteer. That's an important thing to let somebody know about yourself. And when it comes to personal things about yourself, this isn't the time and place to reveal that. You'll have plenty of opportunity and conversation to get to know your interviewers, but it's not where you start when you get asked to tell someone about yourself. Unless, of course, you lived in 6 countries by the time you were 12 and you are going to be involved in a role that has you working cross-culturally. Then it becomes relevant to say that. But you don't want to spend time on things that don't matter to the person listening to you. And this is an important first impression. So in your handouts, you'll find a template that'll give you the framework for thinking through a response, a pro response to this question. And I highly recommend you do that every time you have a new job you're interviewing for, because it may change a little bit depending on the position and what's most important. But I want to give you an opportunity to dig into this a little bit here and to spend a couple of minutes thinking about a couple of pieces of this, how you'd categorize yourself and what you love, what your favorite kind of work is. I like to talk about myself being a communication strategist and a coach who loves helping people succeed. And I thought a lot about those words. And I use them when I do workshops like this because I want you to know that it's fulfilling to me that I'm motivated to help you get a job. I'm motivated to teach you things that I believe are going to make a difference for you. So when you help someone understand what you love in a job interview, you're helping them see that you're right for the job. Because if you love the work they're about to hire you to do, you're going to be a better employee. So I'd like you to spend just a couple minutes identifying how you categorize yourself, what your favorite kind of work is, and then pick 2 or 3 skills or capabilities you have that you believe you've become good at over the last couple of years. And I'm going to go ahead and give everybody a couple minutes to do that. And then if you would post some of your answers in the chat so we can get a sense of how you would answer the first part of the "tell me about yourself" question. It takes some thought. Certainly something you can come back to and work on, but be nice to see what comes to mind for you initially. I'm wondering if anybody wants to volunteer to share what they've come up with or post it in the chat, perhaps. A lunar seismologist. Love it. That's an intriguing description. Stellar and extraplanet astronomer. Right then, I'm far more interested than I'd be if you told me you were living in Boston. So you've got my attention. And figuring out those words is a great place to start getting yourself ready to interview. Organic geochemist by training. Yes. Terrific. Well, I invite you to spend time working through the full answer and coming back to that template each time you have a new interview opportunity, because it'll give you a chance to really make sure you've tailored it for the people who are listening to you. The other question that you often get asked, whoops, I have a feeling I'm not sharing here. The other question you often get asked early in the interview process is tell me about your research. And I was just recently teaching a course at University of Virginia on situational communications, and we talked a little bit about interviewing. And one of the students started by telling me she was a postdoc research associate in a particular lab, and then she went on to give me the classic scientist answer, very technical, focused on identification and deorphanization of the GPCR receptor that binds to a mitogenic tear protein. And I sat there thinking, I have no idea what she does. Back to my earlier point that you want to tailor this to who's listening. Will it matter to me that she's at the Lori Lab? Doubtful, especially if I'm the person from HR. If the Lori Lab was extremely well known and I was applying for a job in my field, yes, that would be an important credential. But for the most part, this is an inside baseball kind of answer. Listen to how she explained it when I asked her to take a different approach. If you were starting a conversation with somebody like me who is not familiar with your research, how might you talk to me using common, concrete, and conversational language?
Well, looking inside now, I probably would say that I work with an eye protein that I don't know if I can use the word rescue, but that rescue cells from stress.
Ooh, I get that. That makes sense. That's common.
And that I am trying to identify the receptor for this eye protein.
Awesome. So she changed her answer and made it much more accessible. And she began to help me appreciate why her work mattered. So the key is to make your research interesting. And I want to introduce you to Donna Vogel. She is a scientist who's done a number of things in her scientific career. And toward the end of her career, ended up doing professional development work for Johns Hopkins. And she was telling me about the way she used to answer this question. And I love her examples. And I think they're really helpful for you to think about how to make your research interesting. One of the things she would say early on was, my goal was to invent the first male contraceptive. She didn't get into the biology and the work that she was doing. She took it up a level. She gave me the bigger picture goal, which obviously would be an intriguing kind of thing to think about. She also did some more esoteric work early in her career. And on the surface of that work, it wasn't particularly interesting. So she found a way to make it interesting. And what she would say is, I spent the best year of my life researching non-existent ganglion in an extinct animal. Notice she didn't tell me that it was the Mexican atl, because I probably wouldn't know what that was. But by choosing the words extinct animal and telling me she was researching something that didn't exist, I was intrigued. I wanted to know more. So that's the key. Think about the research you do and think about what's going to make it interesting to other people. So once again, I want to help you begin to answer that question. And I want you to answer like Donna. So if you would please take a minute to think about that. And in the chat, tell me about your research. What might other people consider interesting? And then go ahead and please post your answers in the chat. And Jessica, if you could read a few of those out for us as they come in, that would be great.
So Joey writes that he shoots rocks with lasers.
That's great. Very concrete. I can picture you doing it. Helps make it come to life.
Kristen writes, I'm looking for life anywhere but Earth. I'm having so much fun growing and studying hardy little microbes from Antarctica.
Terrific. Telling me that you're having fun predisposes me to think that what you're doing is cool because you enjoy it. Emotions are contagious. So incorporating that into your answer makes it more compelling. Makes you more interesting.
Oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
Michelle studies stars other than the sun and what it might be like living on another planet. I'm sorry, Amy, I keep cutting you off, but we have a couple more. Do you want me to just read two more?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, so Marshall writes, I study ways we can use magnetic fields to sense the oceans inside of icy moons.
Okay.
And then Kara writes, I make exoplanet lava in my lab so we can figure out whether life as we know it could live on that planet.
Again, I can picture you there. I can picture you in your lab making lava. You've described that in concrete terms that I can understand, even if I know nothing about the technical side of your research. And that's the idea when you tell people about your research. Make it interesting and intriguing. I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any comments or questions about what we've covered so far before I move us to our next topic. Doesn't look like there are any raised hands, Jessica. All right. I'm going to keep us moving. Behavioral interview questions. That's a very specific kind of a question. And the reason that people ask those questions is that the way you've behaved in the past is a really good predictor of how you're going to behave in the future. So that's the reason that you will get those questions from seasoned interviewers. And you know it's a behavioral question when it's a reflect back on. Tell me about a time, describe a situation, when in the past have you had a chance to fail and figure out how you're going to recover. Those are behavioral questions. So is number 4, how well do you get along with others? And when you get a behavioral question, you need to give an example as part of your answer. You can't just say, I like getting to know new people and I work really well with the colleagues in my research group. That's not a very rich answer. It's an opportunity for you to give me a compelling answer. Tell me a little bit of a story. Tell me that you really like learning from other researchers and you're excited because in 3 weeks, your article is coming out and it's a publication you did with a colleague who you met when you were delivering a poster at a session at the AAAS conference a couple years ago. She came up and asked some questions about your poster, and the more you got to talking, you realized she was definitely someone worth following up with. And over the years, you've been able to collaborate, and now you've got this article coming out. That makes it a far more interesting, rich answer. So you want to think about those parts of your life. You want to reflect back and try to find the stories you can tell during interviews. And we spent a bit of time on the in the workshop just before this one talking about storytelling. So for those of you who haven't learned much about that concept, I recommend you go back and take a look at that recording. The other thing about interviewing and behavioral interview questions is there are so many you could be prepared for. It can be really overwhelming. And one of the pro tools that I have put together is a recommendation on 5 categories of questions to help you have a core set of topics you can speak to. The first category is your work ethic. You need to be able to talk about how you get the job done, what it is about you that makes you the right person for this job. Companies also want to know what kind of problem solver you are, when you've been up against a difficult challenge and how you've overcome it, when something went wrong and you had to fix it. Those are the kinds of examples you want to have and incorporate into your interviews. Because you're scientists, you're likely to be interested in working in a place that values innovation, and they will want to know what sort of innovator you are. How do you get people to support your ideas? That's what it takes to be innovative. So that's another topical category to have answers for. Likewise, people hire you because you've achieved something. And those of you that have gotten a PhD, absolutely, you are achievers. So finding the stories you can tell about achievement, what motivates you, how you keep going when things get hard, something really important that you've accomplished in your life. That's the kind of behavioral interview question you're likely to get. Tell me about a major accomplishment in your early career. The 5th category is key if you're going to work in industry, because all work gets done in teams. And I know some of you have that experience now. So being able to talk about what makes you an effective team player and also someone who has the potential to be a leader. Those are also questions you need to be prepared to answer. And I want to share with you a story about work that I did several years ago with a company that was going to be adding a lot of new people, and they wanted to make sure to preserve their culture. So we spent time putting together a series of questions that they used during interviews to try to understand whether these people they were interviewing would be a good fit for their culture. And all interviewers want to know how a candidate is going to interact with other people. So here's the question. Working with teams on big goals is a big part of what makes our company successful. In fact, our CEO believes that collective IQ is key. Tell me about a memorable team experience. And I want to make 2 points about this question. First is, you might be ready to launch into your team answer once you heard working with teams, but it's really important you listen to the entire question, because you wouldn't have gotten hired for this position if you didn't say something about collective IQ. It was an important part of the question, and it was built in to see whether people were really listening or just getting ready to give their team story because they had one. The other point I want to make is that you want to keep your answers fairly contained and short, because good interviewers are going to probe. They will ask other questions. They're going to want to know more. And in your handouts, there's a list of the kinds of probing questions you're likely to get. So as you think about how you want to be prepared to answer these questions, you want to have a core answer, and then you want to think about how you would embellish if you got asked some additional questions. Remember, I talked about internalizing your story? That's what I meant, that you've really got to think deeply about how to answer questions. And I want to give you another tool for how to structure a behavioral interview question answer. Here's where my PRO acronym really comes in. You want to talk about the predicament, your response, and the outcome. Those are the three pieces of the way you want to answer behavioral interview questions. So the predicament is, what were you up against? The response is your opportunity to explain how you dealt with that situation, what you did. But it's also a really important place to explain why. Help people see inside your thought process. Reveal a bit about who you are. What was it that made you choose to do what you did? And then, of course, it's always great in interviews to quantify an outcome. What was the result? What was the impact of what you did? So let me give you an example. It was just before Thanksgiving break, and I was in a meeting with 5 of my colleagues. We were trying to pick an outside resource that was going to help us run a clinical trial. And 4 of us were all in agreement about one vendor. And I was looking around the room and realizing Evangelina had been really quiet. We hadn't heard anything from her. And I was noticing the look on her face, and she seemed a little bit concerned, perhaps. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on, but I decided it was important to check in. So I said, Evangelina, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, because you haven't said anything. And I get a sense that maybe there's something on your mind. Help us understand what you're thinking. And she launched in and said, well, I understand you all want to work with this vendor, but I had a bad experience with them. And she went on to explain what had happened. And as a result of engaging her and getting her to tell me what she was thinking, we were able to make sure our contract was really clear, to make sure that problem could never happen again. And then all of us were in alignment that, yes, they were the right vendor and that we were making an ideal choice. So I told you a story. I helped you see that I pay attention to my colleagues when I'm in a meeting, that I notice if somebody's quiet, that I know how to ask for their point of view without putting them on the spot. I didn't say, so Evangelina, why aren't you agreeing? I invited her to give me an answer. And then I told you why that conversation mattered. So that's your goal as you're answering behavioral questions. It's to help people see how you approach situations, explain the predicament, give a little bit of detail, give enough color to make it an interesting story. If I just said I was in a meeting with a group of people and one of us didn't agree, and I asked her why she was quiet, and she told me, and then we just made sure that we solved the problem in the contract, that's nowhere near as interesting as me telling you it was just before Thanksgiving and there were 5 of us, and describing for you as though you're with me in that story. I'm picturing the situation so I can relate it to you in an interesting way. So that's the PRO format. And now I know Jessica promised that we would be doing a breakout here. And I know many of you don't love breakouts, but the good news about practicing is that it's what you're going to have to do when you're interviewing. You've got to get comfortable talking to people you don't know. So here's how this is going to work. I've got 5 potential questions. Oh, somebody already disappeared. Fear of breakouts. We see it all the time. I've got 5 questions here. I'd like you to pick one and think about how you would use this PRO structure to answer the question. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to think about that. And then Jessica's going to randomly match people up. And between you, you'll have a total of 5 minutes. So you'll each get about 2.5 minutes where you'll give your answer to the question, and the person listening to you will give you some feedback on how you structured your answer. So that's how it's going to go. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a minute or two to think about your answer, and then we'll break folks out into partners so that you can practice structuring your answer like a pro. Now, I want to put your mind at ease. If this is not coming easily for you, that's okay. This is a new concept. You haven't had a lot of time to think about these answers. If all you can do is start to think about a situation in the past and begin to recall it, that's okay. And when you break out with your partner, if you don't feel like you have an answer ready, just take a minute to get to know the other person. If you don't feel ready to do this, I completely understand. But I want to invite you to spend time by yourself, getting to the point where you could feel ready. You could feel like you could give a well-structured answer. So Jessica, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to break people into partners. Before you send people off, please take a screen grab or a photo of the list of questions here so that you have them handy and you can share the question that you'd like to answer with your partner. And we'll give you a heads up at about the 2.5 minute mark to change partners, and then we'll invite you back so that you've got a little countdown for coming back to the main room. So do the best you can with this. I recognize it's new for many of you, but I want you to start to understand the kinds of questions you need to be prepared to answer in job interviews. Okay, Jessica, go ahead and do our breakouts.
Well, I hope you all had a good time talking to another early career scientist about you and your science.
And the point I want to leave you with is that you now have a framework to use. And the good news about that structure is if you get asked a question you haven't prepared for, you have an organizing principle in your own mind. And it's perfectly okay to say in an interview, I'm going to take a minute and give that one some thought. It's perfectly okay to do that. In fact, you will come across as very confident if you say that. You don't have to have the answer ready to go the minute the question is asked. So now I want to talk about the notion of having a value conversation. Your goal is to communicate your value to the company, to the team, and to the hiring manager. Managers want a team that helps them get the job done. They want a team that helps them look good. These are the things you want to keep in mind as you're talking about what you bring to the table. And you're going to be telling them about your capabilities, but also who you are as a person. And if you're the one who has the stamina to stay up night after night to run experiments, that could be exceptionally important to your hiring manager. So those are the sorts of things you want to convey in your value conversation. And I want to give you another pro tool around the elements to a value conversation. It starts with being able to describe your capabilities succinctly. And we've been working on some of that. The second piece is to show why you are the right person for the company and why the company is right for you. The third element of your value conversation is to help interviewers actually see you in the job. And in order to do that, you have to know enough about the job to see yourself doing it. And the fourth part of it is something called priming. You want to prime the hiring manager to make you an offer. And I want to give you an example of how to do this. And in your handouts, you'll have materials that'll help you work your way through this. But I'm going to unpack for you the thinking behind these elements and why, as a communication strategist, I know this is the sort of thing that will make a difference for you when you're interviewing. So first of all, you have to start with a job description. You've got to build this value conversation around a job description. This was a job I had looked into that was posted by Genentech for an associate scientist role in their reverse translation group. And in order to show that you're right for the company and the company is right for you, you have to do your research. So I went online and I started reading to see what the news feed had to say at Genentech. And I found something that I thought I could link to this job opportunity. So what I want to do now is show you the article that I saw. It was about approval that they had gotten under a fast-tracked kind of process for a leukemia medicine. And I took that piece of news and I incorporated it into what I'm about to play for you. And what I'm going to play for you is a monologue, but it's a monologue that shows you all four pieces of what I'm describing for this value conversation. And then I'll unpack them. But first, just take a listen to it.
Through my PhD and postdoc work, I've really honed my ability to analyze data. And I've discovered the deep satisfaction that I get from using machine learning methods and applying insights to find solutions faster. That's why this opportunity feels so right for me. You know, I saw the news that Genentech just got FDA approval for a new leukemia medicine through an expedited program, and that tells me that speed really matters here, which is why Genentech is a company where I know I can make an impact. I see myself 6 months from now analyzing trial data and helping to identify the mechanisms of response and resistance, learning so much and getting to know all the people on the team. The opportunity to be part of the reverse translation work you are doing is so inspiring to me. And I would be thrilled to work with you on finding new ways to outsmart cancer.
So now I want to unpack the pieces of that conversation. Talking about skills and making the point that I get deep satisfaction from doing this work. And the reason it's important to stress that this gives you satisfaction is that companies spend a lot of money trying to hire people and train them. And if you come to a job and you're going to love what you're doing, you're going to give it your all, you're going to be better at it, and you're going to stay longer. So you want to convey what it is you love about your work, why you find it satisfying, and make the connection between that and why this job feels right for you. That's how you help somebody see you in the job. You make that connection. You literally say something like that. Then you want to make it clear that you've done your homework. Every HR person I know tells me that they don't hire people if it's not clear that they've done research, that they've read more than just the homepage on the website and the about section. Read the news feeds. Take a look at their earnings announcements if they're publicly traded. And when you're reading, look for something that matters to you, that resonates for you, that makes you go, I would like to work for a company that gets to do this or cares about that, or to be part of an organization that's focused on these sorts of things. And that's what you want to convey. You want to explain, you want to be explicit about the fact you've done your homework. You could mention an article you read, or you could mention something that somebody you talked to told you who already works at the company. just want to make it clear you've done your homework and link it to why it's a place that's right for you, how you can make an impact working there. Then you want to really paint the picture of what you'll be doing in the job. You want to see yourself in the job and you want to convey what that'll be about. And I've highlighted the words learning and contribution and inspired here. It's really important in any job interview to make it clear that you want to learn and that you want to contribute. So find a way to say those things as you talk about the job. And the reason I have the word inspired and the word thrilled highlighted here is because those are emotional words. And this gets into how you connect with people. We connect with each other at a people level, at an emotional level. So when you start to talk about being inspired or thrilled, and I'm the person you'd work for, or I'm part of the work group, chances are good I'm inspired to do that work. I love getting a chance to outsmart cancer. You are going to become far more relatable when you start to say things that resonate with me emotionally. So these 4 elements are important parts of your value conversation. They also work really nicely as a framework for a follow-up thank you note too. You can touch on some of the same information as a thank you note. So the importance of tapping into emotion really got driven home for me when I heard Chris Volpe speak a couple of years ago at a conference. He runs an organization called Science Counts. They advocate for science and getting more research money into science. And what he said is, human beings are feeling beings who think, not thinking beings who feel. So that's the reason that tapping into emotion is so important. The last piece of this is about priming, and I want to tell you about Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He is a Nobel Prize winner, has done a lot of work on decision-making, and the concept of priming is something that I believe can make a difference in interviews. I think you can say things and do things to get people to think about you as the right person in the job. And I'll give you a minute to read this. It's about words and how words prime us to think about certain things. Take a minute and read it. So the priming effect has to do with associative memory, the things that we connect to the things that we hear. So if you start to talk to me about getting to know people on the team, I'm going to begin thinking about you as somebody who would be in that job, getting to know people on the team. I think this concept can be extended. And from what I'm hearing from people I'm talking to, it can be really helpful. And I did a workshop the other day where a woman chimed in and she said, I was just on an interview committee, and the candidate that stood out the most was a guy who had actually come into the interviews talking about the collaborations he could have with different people on the team. He had done his homework and he figured out the kinds of things he could do with other people on the team. And she said he really stood out. So that's how you can use priming to help distinguish yourself and stand out in interviews. I don't have time to really do justice to negotiating. It is a subject in and of itself, but I want to touch on 6 principles quickly, and I want to point you to some materials that I've included in your handouts. There's some great articles for those of you who are getting ready to negotiate. It starts with knowing your value and knowing what people get paid to do the job you're about to be hired to do in the community where you're going to be working, because it varies depending on where you live. You always want to try to negotiate for a higher base salary. And if you're coming into the workplace for the first time, that can be really hard to do unless you have discovered through the process of interviewing that you have some skills that they really need and no one else on the team has. Then you have some special value. You have a little bit of negotiating leverage. Compensation is more than just what goes into your paycheck. And in some cases, you can negotiate for a signing bonus. You can negotiate for moving costs being covered. Depends on the company, depends on how much they need you in the role. If it's a big business, chances are they have a lot of rules around how much vacation you get and how much sick time you get. But smaller companies have more flexibility. And my belief is it doesn't hurt to ask. It's also important to recognize that your title is tied to what you get paid. And I worked for a great mentor early in my career. He couldn't afford to pay me very much when he hired me, but he kept changing my title. So that's something you and your boss can talk about. How can I move into a new role with a different title if you have to say yes to an offer that isn't quite what you want it to be? It's also important for you to know your must-haves. And this is my now 31-year-old daughter, Alyssa. But when she was born, I decided not to go back to a 1-hour commute each way job in the city. And I was able to negotiate a job share arrangement. And I knew that unless they paid me a certain amount, I couldn't get the daycare I wanted for my daughter. So I was very clear about what my must-haves were. And you'll want to think about that too. And last but not least, there's an important tone in negotiating. It's always about we. How can we make this work? It's a win-win kind of an exchange, and you always want to be respectful. In your handouts, you will find answers to a lot of the tricky situations you'll find yourself in, like what happens when they make you an offer and it's less than what you want. How do you handle that? So I highly recommend those of you that are getting ready to negotiate offers, spend some time with the materials. What I want to cover before we wrap up today is what I think can make the biggest difference. It goes back to what Gwen talked about, the importance of rapport and first impressions. First impressions happen so fast. That is what we do as human beings. We judge people the moment we see them. First and foremost, it's how they look, but it's also about tone and energy and the words that you use. So, do you want to get to know these people? What about now? I cannot say enough how important it is to smile. It changes everything. Your smile is the starting point for building rapport, because a smile exudes warmth. Making eye contact helps to create rapport and exude warmth. To build rapport, you need to come across as somebody confident, somebody that somebody else would want to get to know. That means you want to present yourself with an upright posture. You want to gesture naturally. You want to be positioned. If you're on a screen, you want to be positioned in a way people can see you, not like this. You want to be looking so that you're making eye contact instead of having your head down. Those are all really important aspects to coming across as confident. You also want to come across as somebody who's relatable, because people are more comfortable with people who are like them. And the fourth element to building rapport is to be enthusiastic. You have got an opportunity to come to work with this group of people, and you need to have the energy that conveys that you're excited about that. And as we were working through this workshop, Jessica and Melissa and I were talking, and Melissa told this great story about the importance of warmth and enthusiasm and how that matters. So I'd like to invite her to share that story with you all now, because I think it really helps drive the point I've been making all along about the importance of rapport.
Hi, everybody. So the story that I told Amy and Jessica was about a student. Years ago, I was interviewing for a student for my lab, and one of the candidates came in and she was very serious. That's just how that's what her personality was. Very quiet, very reserved. And, I would ask questions, she would respond, but there wasn't much going on there. We did not have very much rapport. And I wasn't looking for a friend. I was looking for somebody, to work in the lab and to accomplish some goals. So that wasn't the primary factor. But at one point, there was some question that I asked and it clicked with her. And she suddenly, became so much more attentive. She leaned forward and she became much more animated. She still didn't necessarily smile, but she started talking and explained whatever it was to me, and we clicked. She had some joy. I got to see what made her excited, why she wanted this job, and she was selected, and she was fabulous. So she's still a very serious person, and that's fine. But you need to show that this is your passion.
Thank you for giving us that story. And for those of you that find yourself thinking, yeah, that's me. I'm quiet, I'm reserved. Here's my advice to you. Think about something that is really exciting in your life. And remember what it feels like when you're talking about something exciting, because all of us will become naturally more animated. And this story proves it. Here was this person who'd been pretty low key the entire time. And then there was this moment. So we all have that in us. For some of us, it comes out naturally. For some of us, we have to work harder at it. It takes me back to my point about the importance of practice. You really do need to practice. But I want to give you some additional skill building ideas around how, whoops, where did my slides go? Around how you can become a better rapport builder and connect with people. Remember that interviews are conversations. You don't want to do all of the talking. You want to be able to ask open-ended questions to find out about the role, to understand what the manager is really looking for in the position that they're trying to fill. You also want to take notice of the person you're communicating with, and you want to be what I think of as a communications chameleon. And what I mean by that is, if you happen to be boisterous and animated and talk really loudly and energetically, and the person across the table from you is low key, there's going to be a big gap between who you are and who they are. And it reminds me so vividly of a conversation with a man by the name of John Writing. He was the senior vice president at AirTouch. And I was there to present to him this very elaborate plan we'd built when we were launching a new brand. Our goal was to introduce this brand in a way that every employee understood how to deliver on it. And I was really excited to share this with John. John was the most mild-mannered, low-key, soft-spoken, slow-speaking person. And here I was being me. And all of a sudden I realized I needed to downshift. So pay attention to that. If you're talking to somebody who speaks in short sentences, you don't want to speak in paragraphs. You want to tune in. And people who have rapport with one another naturally start to be a bit in sync. And there's a lot of research that shows this. In fact, there's a concept called mirroring, which you'll read about in your handouts, where you literally will take the same body position somebody has. So if I've leaned forward, you'd lean forward. You're going to engage with me, and you're starting to help me feel more connected to you. If I've got my hand on my chin, you can a moment later put your hand on your chin. You don't want to mimic me. You don't want me to feel like you're copying what I'm doing. You want it to be subtle and natural. You're not going to copy every move. But if I'm somebody who gestures and you don't gesture at all, or your hands are low down and you see me gesturing like this, you're going to want to make sure your hands are higher up. So when you move them, which you naturally do when you talk to some extent, I'll see them. So that's the idea of being a bit of a communications chameleon, to help people feel a little bit more like you so that they can relate to you. Now I want to talk about several things you can do to stand out during interviews. And I want to come back to the point I made about emotion and tell you about Dr. John Medina. He's a molecular biologist and he's very focused on the brain. He's got a great book called Brain Rules. And the reason that emotion is important, and the reason that telling good stories is helpful in interviews, is that when the brain detects something that's emotionally charged, it gets your amygdala going. That's where we process emotion, and that's where you'll release some dopamine. And dopamine has an impact on memory and information processing. So as John says, it's like putting a Post-it note on something. And stories in and of themselves are memorable and they're engaging, especially if there's an emotional component, something that was disappointing to you, something that was really hard that you overcame, something that was really exciting that you got to be part of. That's how you connect. And you become the candidate who told that great story about recovery after failure on an experiment. And guess what? When the interviewers get back together at the end of the day and they're comparing candidates, if you've told a good story, it's more likely that it will get retold. And stories capture hearts and minds. So as you prepare to interview, as you think about the answers to behavioral questions, you want to think about how you can relate them as stories, how you can tell me when it happened, what you were up against, how you thought about your response and what the outcome was. The more you can tell it like a story, the better you are. And the more you can choose stories that help interviewers see you in the job, the better able you'll be to stand out from other people, because most candidates are nowhere near this strategic about their communication. They're in there answering questions. They're not thinking about using stories as a way to make impact. The other thing you can do to stand out is to make sure you don't overload on details. And this can be tricky with a lot of the scientists that I work with, because you live in details. You have to. That's part of how you're good at what you do. But in an interview situation, you don't want to dive right in. You want to answer questions giving a big picture view first. And you always want to come back to the job. You want what you're saying to be relevant to the job. And yes, it's okay to include some details, but just make sure they're meaningful details. And for those of you who have to give an interview seminar as part of an interview process, you have an opportunity to weave in stories, to weave in examples, to pick the details that are going to be relevant to what it would be like if you were part of this team, to emphasize the things that are important to the people listening to you. So when you think about details, be really disciplined and ask yourself, does this one matter? Are they going to really care about it? And maybe your teammates would care about it because it has to do with the way you run studies, and it's something that will matter when you're working with them. But the HR person probably isn't going to care. So think about who's listening to you and the most appropriate details. I want to come back to the formula that I introduced at the beginning. As you start to think about getting ready to interview, you now know how to tell your value story and the importance of focusing on your contribution and what differentiates you. I've given you some insights on how to be more compelling, to use examples, to be colorful, to use common and concrete language, to talk about your research in ways that will be interesting to other people. I've given you some conceptual frameworks for building rapport and creating connection. I've reminded you that just plain smiling is super powerful. And, you know, in interviews, it's kind of intense. So that's not necessarily a natural time for you to smile. You may need to practice that a bit to let it come out and to figure out where it makes sense to naturally smile. And we talked about the importance to show that you fit for the job itself, and because you're somebody who believes in the mission of the company and wants to be a member of the team. And I want to leave you with an analogy that I think is key to how you approach interviews overall. Everything you do in an interview process, from the time you submit your resume to your cover letters to your interviews, is like taking different pieces of fabric and creating a quilt. You want to choose them really purposefully. You want to think about every example that you give with the goal of making sure that that picture emerges in the end, that you show up as the candidate that's ideally suited for the job. So when you think about communicating who you are, it's your capabilities, but it's also really important to communicate who you are as a person, and to come into job interviews not being nervous, but being excited, because you might just be meeting the people who are going to be your colleagues for the next decade of your life. So I wish you all every success, and we've got some time left for questions, so I'm happy to entertain questions that anybody has from what we've talked about today. And you can feel free to raise a hand or come off mute.
Mhm.
And let
There-
us know.
Yeah, there was a question earlier, and I want to make sure that we get to it. The question is from Janeth Valverde, who asks, will saying that we love it, like a topic or a research or a potential job so much, have an impact on our capabilities of negotiating our salary?
I don't believe so. I think it's going to help your case because companies want to invest in someone who's going to love the work. And if you can tell a story about yourself that reinforces why you have special skills, that's where negotiation comes in, is what makes you really good at the work. So saying that you love it will not take away your ability to negotiate. You just have to demonstrate why you're exceptionally good at it. There's one other question that I wanted to bring out, and we were chatting about this earlier today. I think in today's job environment, there will likely be a question about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do you do as someone who comes into the workplace to make sure that a company and your work group pays attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion? I think that's an important topic to be ready to speak to in job interviews because it's become such a popular issue. And every article I read these days reinforces how much companies are trying to build programs to be more inclusive. So you as a prospective employee need to be able to talk about how you work with people, with all different kinds of people. Anything else I can answer for you today?
There's one more question from Mackenzie. Do you want to read that out, Jessica?
Sure thing. So Max, what resources or organizations would you recommend for career exploration and development?
Well, in our very first workshop, we talked about a couple of tools that exist that I would point you to. There's one that was designed specifically for scientists. And if you go back to the worksheets from the first workshop, you'll see information about how to access it. It's a tool that helps you think through your interests and your skills and your values. And I've also included some links to other tools to help you understand your values. So that's one. The other way I would answer your question is to say that as you start to think about what kind of work you might like to do, one of the best strategies is to reach out to people who already do that work and ask for informational interviews. And in an earlier workshop, I talked quite a bit about how you do that. And in an informational interview, that's the opportune time to ask, because this is somebody in the field. Ask them what they read, ask them who they follow on Twitter or LinkedIn. And that's how you begin to find out about resources that are going to help you get acquainted with a particular profession that you might like to interview for.
So Alan has his hand raised. Alan, do you want me to unmute you?
Yes, please.
Hi, Alan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about asking for clarification if you don't understand something that in a question the interviewer asks. So, for example, in that sample culture question that you put up, there was a sentence about the CEO thinking that collective IQ was a really important thing. And I have no idea what that is.
Yes, you don't. And the perfect thing to do would have been to ask, say, I'm really curious. What does he mean by that? And if you had started your answer by saying, I got to ask, I'm really curious, what does your CEO mean by that? You would have showed me that you were really interested in our company because you want to know what the CEO thinks. So it's absolutely appropriate to ask for clarification. And especially in a question like that. That question, in some respects, was very designed to ferret out whether we were dealing with a candidate who was curious, who was comfortable speaking up and asking, and who was really listening, because some people might have just launched into their team answer and never bothered. Asking for clarification is always okay. The other thing that you'll find in your handouts is a set of questions that you can ask during interviews that will help you stand out. Questions like, what are the people who are most successful in this role accomplishing in their first few months on the job? When you ask a question like that, you point out that you want to be that person. So those questions are designed to help you impress your interviewers with the way in which you're asking. Anybody else with questions? Well, I will invite you to reach out to me if you have something come to mind as you work through the materials. Like I said, there's some additional information there that we didn't have time to cover today, but it has just been a delight for me to be partnering with Jessica and Melissa and Sean to bring you these workshops. And I believe that smart people can find really fulfilling work in a lot of places in industry. I've spent a lot of years in industry, and I know that your skills, your problem solving skills, your critical thinking skills, your research skills are super valuable. So for those of you that don't know what you want to be when you grow up, just know that it's a journey and you will find your way, and that it's always up to you to choose to move on if you're not doing something that inspires you. So my wish for you is that you have great success in finding your professional selves and that you always do work that you love.
Amy, thank you so much for putting on these workshops together. I know how much work that they are, and I appreciate you spending your time to teach us with your experience and your wisdom. And it's just a pleasure to work with you too.
Thanks. Great to see you all today.
Everybody who's still on, I want you to know that I just updated the PAWS page on the Nexus website. So the link to I don't have the recording for this yet because it's still ongoing, but the resources are already up on the webpage. So you can go there right now and actually click on the link to download all of the slides and the resources that Amy alluded to today. And please, 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 I'm going to send out a feedback survey after this. Please fill that out, especially if you have very good things to say. We're looking for ways to grow and improve this program in the future. So any feedback you can offer would be really helpful. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you for your time and your attention. And well, we will see you again in late January for the next PAWS event.